Hi, I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about gift giving in the school setting. Hopefully I'll offer you some guidelines and also some cautions. One of the types of gifts that are given at schools are student gifts. There are two types of acceptable gifts for school. The first are incentives for fundraising events. And if you do plan to give incentives for these events, there's a couple things you should keep in mind. First, these incentives should be purchased with funds raised by the student group that was involved. And the incentive should also be limited to students who participated in the fundraising event. So you don't want to offer incentives to kids who didn't participate. The final thing that you need to keep in mind about incentives for fundraisers is that you shouldn't favor one group over another. So you can't offer rewards to Mrs. Wilson's class, but not to Mrs. Smith's class. The second type of student gifts that I want to talk about are awards for special achievement. And usually these types of gifts should be rather inexpensive and age appropriate. And sometimes they can be funded through the general fund, but you need to be cautious about doing that. And also, they can be funded through parent groups or an athletic fund or an activity fund, but you just need to make sure that whichever fund you're using is also benefiting the students that are in that club and not students in a different activity club. I included this quote here just because I wanted to remind people that monetary rewards aren't always necessary, and I don't think those are the things that kids remember anyway. So keep in mind that little notes or acts of kindness are much more appreciated and remembered in the long run. I included this because this chapter talks about if you're an administrator giving gifts, and I wanted to just allude to the point that you need to be careful about accepting gifts as well. This is a headline of an administrator who actually was found guilty or pleaded guilty to accepting gifts. I have a link here for the original story, and it just a couple details off of it. This gentleman was a former assistant school superintendent, and he admitted to accepting gifts and favors from contractors while on the job. He was given a 45-day suspended sentence, placed on 12-month supervised probation, fined $5,000, and ordered to perform 50 hours of community service. If that seems harsh, I think the part that's more scary to me is the fact that he no longer has a job. So I just wanted to draw attention to that a little bit while I'm talking about the other kinds of things that you need to keep in mind with gift giving. Another type of gifts that you might find yourself giving as a school administrator are staff gifts. And there's three types of gifts that you could possibly give it in this area. The first are special occasion gifts, and these usually come from teacher or staff created funds that actually the staff in the building, they pay dues to the fund, and then there's set guidelines for how the money is spent. And this is an appropriate way to give gifts. You just need to make sure that there's a committee that has looked over the procedures and that the procedures are followed, and that that you rotate different people into that committee on the next year or whichever however many years you're working with the school. Another kind of staff gift that occurs are fundraising incentives, and these the guidelines for that are pretty similar to what they would be for students. You just need to remember to make sure that those gifts are reasonable in cost and that that they're not inappropriate. All staff gifts I can see where administrators might want to give these from occasion. And you need to be careful that, where these are funded from. They shouldn't be funded from a general fund. And usually they're probably funded from a PTO or a PTA organization. And they're usually indicated for this specific purpose. And as I put on there, any type of staff gift giving should be guided by written agreed upon procedures. So make sure you check your policies, your district policies, before participating in any gift giving. This was a quote I took from the book, and I thought it was probably kind of important to remember. It was the thing in the text that I found most meaningful, and keeping in mind that if you're going to purchase gifts for students or staff, you need to be thinking about what the public would think about that. Sometimes there are some exceptional situations in which schools decide to raise funds for different staff members or for families. In particular, if you're raising money for staff, you need to keep in mind that any kind of funds that are raised in that manner need to be, it's considered taxable income, and therefore it needs to be given to the payroll department. So just be cautious in that. And oftentimes this comes up as a staff member who's going through a particularly difficult situation, or a family whose home is burned down. These are just catastrophic events that sometimes people decide to get together and collect money to give to this person. And the important thing to remember, like I said, is that you need to keep in mind that that becomes considered taxable income, and you should report it to the payroll department. I did a little search when I was getting ready for this presentation, and I found that there are some laws on the books about gift giving for public employees, and one particular one was the 2011 Iowa Gift Law. And they offered a couple of scenarios that I thought you might find interesting. The first scenario says a clothing company contacts an activities director and coaching staff with a deal for their school. To get the AD and coaches to recommend the company to the superintendent and school board members, the company wants to give clothing to the AD and coaches. So the question is that appropriate? And the answer is no. The second scenario involves a curriculum publisher contacts the math department of a district and offers free DVD players to the teachers if they can get their building principal to recommend the company to the superintendent and school board members. And as it says right here, the reality of this is that this particular code and law prohibits the above conduct. So it's important to, I know that we're talking about an administrator thinking about giving gifts and the cautions for that, but it's also, like I mentioned earlier, important to remember that sometimes people are going to offer you gifts, and you need to be careful in how you handle those situations. And that's the end of my presentation, and I hope that I've offered you some helpful hints and guidelines and cautions. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me at my email on the screen, and I will do my best to get back to you. Thank you for watching.